the mother stone is brown and
Sometimes it's black, and then sometimes with the classic Lone Mountain, you have both that blue or black matrix and a brown matrix.
Hey. All right. Well, we are here with Gene Waddell, often referred to as the godfather of turquoise, as you can see why. Gene, tell us about kind of getting started in the industry and what it was like back then, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I got involved. I went to college and was a teacher for 3 years, and then in the summer I would help my father in the turquoise business. And he had owned turquoise mines. He brokered a lot of the great turquoise that came out of the Southwest from the 30s through the. He wasn't active after about 1980. But
your father?
My father. His name was B.C. Waddell.
Okay.
And he was one of the, he dealt with C.G. Wallace, who was the father of modern Zuni jewelry. He lived at Zuni. He dealt with the Edgar family, who was a major family in turquoise mining in Nevada. And then we used to buy Bisbee turquoise whenever Warren Matthews was out there. And all this goes back to the 70s and 80s. And now most of the turquoise that, for example, you see on this table, the Bisbee turquoise, this mine's been closed now. The only Bisbee you see coming out is out of old stashes, people that mined it out or had it in their safes for years. So it's unusual to see Bisbee. And then there's a variety of color. The darker blues like this are the more expensive, but then there's some just beautiful blues like this. One of the jewelers would probably pick this out and make a bolo tie out of it, or maybe a big bracelet.
That's a beautiful blue.
And that's a beautiful blue. This is how it looks. This is some Bisbee, how it looks out of Mother Earth. And you see this part, it looks like dirt. It pretty much is. It's the host rock. And then if you get into this is the really blue Bisbee. And so an artist or a jeweler would pick this and then cut it and then make either cabochons out of it, or some of the artists might take it and inlay it. Guys like Wes Willey or Lee Yazzie or Olin Tassini, all those guys love good turquoise, and today it's just finding it. So this mine is closed. This is another one. This is all out of Charles Laloma's personal collection. He passed away in 1991. Used to buy a lot of Nevada blue, and this is all Nevada blue turquoise that was, this hasn't been offered much for sale. It hasn't operated as a mine since the 1980s, so this is very rare too. This is rare. This is Lone Mountain turquoise, which is a partner in this particular turquoise mine. It's one of the probably top 4 collectible turquoises. One would be Bisbee blue, one is Lone Mountain, the other one would be number 8, or Lander blue. This is a piece of Lander turquoise. And that's why out of all these stones here, I have one piece of Lander blue. It's very rare.
Wow.
But if you showed collectors, somebody might love this color versus somebody might love this. This is just a beautiful spider web, kind of a lighter blue-green, I guess. So,
why do you think it caught on like it did back then when you started, or what do you think drew people to it?
I think whenever I first started, when you look back historically, the 70s was a great time in our industry. I mean, you had people were buying Indian jewelry that never had bought Indian jewelry. It became a fashion item. It was, and almost anything would sell. So you had a lot of stuff, jewelry that was made that was subpar, frankly. They used stabilized turquoise. The silver work wasn't all that good. And then during the 70s, you had some of the greatest Indian jewelers of our time, from Charles Loma to Preston Manania, Larry Galsh, James Little. All those guys kind of got their start in the 70s, and they became famous in the 70s. Arizona Highways was publishing magazines on this art form that the Indians were doing, and it went from traditional to the more contemporary. That's when you saw artists start to use more gold in the 70s. And I still do shows occasionally around the country, and people will say, I didn't know Native Americans used gold in Indian jewelry, but they really have since the 70s. And we deal with collectors who love gold with Indian jewelry, and then some people only will buy silver.
Silver.
They love silver. So I would say again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and it's what you love, and that's what you should buy and collect.
These stones in front of you are just amazing examples of.
Yeah, these are wonderful examples of. These are stones that were just came out of the earth. This is Lone Mountain turquoise, and it was formed into a single stone, or a single smooth nugget, if you will. But that's really unusual. And to find a big piece of Lone Mountain like this is 271 carats. Very unusual. And this again was collected by Charles Laloma, and Charles probably had something in mind for this at one time.
Right.
To make something, but in his lifetime he couldn't make everything up. So this is beautiful Lone Mountain. This is more green. This is Caracal Lake turquoise. This is 322 carats. So this is 322, this is 271. This actually weighs more. It's a little thicker.
Right.
And the carats just mean the weight of the stone. And you price these by the carat. So the higher the grade, and depending on the mine, the price can run from, a few dollars a carat, maybe $5 or $10 a carat, up to several hundred a carat. This probably would be in the $50 to $100 a carat. This one would be more in the probably $40 to $50 a carat.
Okay. And what's that deep blue thin one there? That's a beautiful.
This one?
And
This one. This is a beautiful stone. This is Morenci turquoise out of Morenci, Arizona. And this, see how it's sort of pitted in here? This was cut out of a vein of turquoise, natural turquoise like this, that came out of the earth. Then it was cut into this stone, and this wasn't quite finished off. I would assume that Laloma may have cut this himself and trying to come up with something he might want to make.
You worked alongside Charles for quite a while. What was he to the industry? Was he the first artist that really took it in a contemporary way, or what do you think was why he's still so important today?
I think other than me, there's people that have written books on contemporary Indian jewelry, from the curator at the Herd, Diana Pardue, to the Arizona Highways that came out, Jerry Jocka back in the 80s, and they always talked about Charles in a special way, and he was special. He was truly the innovator in contemporary Indian jewelry. He was a Hopi Indian who, during that period, if you made silver jewelry, they call it silver overlay jewelry, the Hopis made that style, and it became their style really after World War II. And Charles would make things that weren't just silver. He would use gold, or silver and gold, and he would do beautiful inlay. And it was just foreign. Whenever he first entered pieces in Gallup ceremonial, they wouldn't even judge it. They said, well, this isn't really Hopi jewelry.
Oh, really?
And he kind of showed them. He became the one. And I think he influenced a lot of the contemporary jewelers, young jewelers today.
Even still,
the young,
right?
And that's, I still do. I think guys like Wes Willie, I know, were influenced. Olin was influenced. Yeah. Whenever you talk to Lee and Raymond Yazzie, they say we weren't influenced by him because they came along at a similar time, and they were in Gallup, and you kind of had the Gallup group, and then you had Charles out at Hopi, but he was working with, of course, Lloyd Kivanou and other people in the art world, and he had a place down here in Scottsdale, and there were people doing pottery. He started with pottery, right?
Oh.
And then he started into jewelry in the late 50s, early 60s, and now his things are very collectible. And I think it's more the influence that I love to see on the young up-and-coming jewelers, and some of them are doing similar styles, some have completely gone off on their own, but you will see the influence that Charles and most of them.
What was he like as a person?
He was a great guy. He was funny. He had a great sense of humor. Most people that knew him knew that he loved life. He loved men and women. He particularly loved women. He was just an interesting guy. But whenever he talked about his jewelry, he had a ore stone. Remember, we were up at Lone Mountain once, and we were walking down into the pit, and he bends over and he goes, "Look at this," and he picks up just a rock. It was a smooth, almost like a river rock, because it was so smooth. And I said, well, Charles, I was 32 and I
Right.
thought I knew everything. And I said, Charles, that's not turquoise. He said, I know it isn't, but he said, I could make a masterpiece. He said, I just like, it's a beautiful rock and you could make a beautiful piece of jewelry. Actually, Georgia Laloma in her personal collection still has a couple of rocks like that Charles inlaid.
Oh, really?
And it's been featured in a couple of different books that talk about his work. But he was just a true designer, and more than that, an innovator, and people love the guy. I mean, he had such a great influence.
And he was incredibly popular while he was still alive. Right?
He was popular while he was alive, and unfortunately, he passed away when I think he was 71 years old.
Oh, right.
And he had an accident, and there was some tragedy that went along with it. But so he stopped making jewelry somewhere in the mid 80s, mid to late 80s. But he passed away in 1991. But it's such a great influence. His niece Verma, who still makes jewelry under Sonwai, he had a great influence on her. But I think she had a great influence on him. She worked with him, and I think anytime you work with somebody 20 years, you influence each other.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
But it was interesting to see people like Charles using great, whether it was turquoise or coral. All of this coral came from his collection as well. It's coral from the Mediterranean Sea. But it's always been important in Indian jewelry, really, since they started setting it in silver, probably around after the turn of the last century, in the early 1900s. They started setting turquoise in their work, and then that developed. And initially, they didn't care where the turquoise came from. It wasn't always even mentioned the name of the mine. But since the 40s, 50s, and beyond, it's important now. People want to know where this turquoise came from. Right. Where, and the artists, the jewelers that I know, the contemporary jewelers, like to represent that. They want to know where it came from. They, and a lot of the collectors prefer American turquoise, the classic southwestern mines. The problem is there's a map up here that shows all of these turquoise mines. There's probably, I don't know, 30 or 40 represented, and there's been hundreds of mines in the Southwest that have been mined at one time or another. But out of all these mines, there's probably, as today, there's probably only 3 or 4 of these that still produce much turquoise.
Really? And that's Kingman?
Yeah, the one in Arizona that still produces is Kingman turquoise, and it's always been a big producer. It produces tons of turquoise, whereas a mine like Lone Mountain, which we own up in Nevada, it would produce maybe hundreds of pounds over a year, where this would produce tons.
Wow.
And they'd say, well, then does that hurt the value? There's natural Kingman and there's stabilized. 90% of what comes out of here is stabilized or enhanced. So again, most collectors who want Laloma quality or the really best, they want natural. And so all of these mines, I've had turquoise from all of them, but most all of them are closed.
What are some of the other ones that are active still?
The other active, you still see Morenci, although it's closed, but there's a family, the Brown family, that had the rights to it, still sells some of it, but again, it's rare, so it's more expensive. But Lander's closed, Number 8's closed, Blue Gem's closed. In other words, you could go all the way around here and almost everything's closed. Lone Mountain's open, which is down here. Royston, the people that have Royston, Pilot Mountain. All of these are kind of in the same area near Tonopah, Nevada.
Okay.
And so is Easter Blue. So they mine all of these kind of sporadically. It's not like an ongoing thing. So, and that lets you know whenever you know which mines are operating. If you go to buy Indian jewelry, you can look even at the kind of the production jewelry that comes out of Gallup and Albuquerque. It's still, the really good stuff is Indian handmade, and they use Royston. Well, that turquoise might be $500 or $600 a pound, versus if it's high grade Lone Mountain or Lander, it's tens of thousands of dollars a pound. So there's a fact of which mines open, but which are the really rare, which are the more expensive.
I see.
You know, it varies. And it also varies. Some people just love the blue and some love green. So, you know, you get a lot of the green turquoise and blue comes out of Nevada. You can see it's much bigger producer than, say, Arizona or New Mexico or Colorado. The interesting thing, though, in the last 20, 25 years, the biggest producers of turquoise have been Kingman, and before that Sleeping Beauty. Both of them produced literally tons of turquoise.
Really?
And so Arizona, I'm sure, outproduced all of these mines together, just in those two mines.
Just because so much was coming in.
So much came out. These
Right.
were copper mines. Where it's in Nevada, none of these were copper mines, really. It wasn't a byproduct where Arizona it was. So it was mined as a copper company, much bigger equipment, more people. So the byproduct, you got more turquoise out.
We've heard, not to put you on the spot, but we've heard that you've got a top 5 list of your favorite mines. Do you mind?
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing it with us?
No, and I always mention the top 5 favorites, but there's 4 that come to mind, and then after that, there's sort of a variety of
Okay.
mines. But I'd say, and again, we try to say, if you talk to collectors or dealers, or like you, Josh, what are your favorite turquoise mines over time? Or if you ask some of the artists like Wes and those guys. But one would be Lander, and Lander is just rare, Lander blue turquoise, and that comes out of Lander County, Nevada.
Okay.
Only probably 100 pounds roughly was ever mined.
That's
So
it.
this was one unique piece, 40 carats or 41 carats, that was in Loloma's collection.
Wow.
If you look at some of the old Arizona highways and some of the old Jerry Jocka books, there's several pieces that Charles made up with Lander
Okay.
that are pretty iconic pieces that some of them we've resold out of different collections, and some we know where the pieces are. So it's kind of fun to track those, you know. But Lander would be one. The other one would be Bisbee, and not because of the gold, but this is just really high-grade Bisbee. It doesn't get much better than that. Kind of that super dark blue with the kind of the, I call it a chocolate matrix. And then the other one would be, this is Lone Mountain. This is rough Lone Mountain. And then all of this here is Lone Mountain. And like, you see how this is a little bit darker, you guys? Versus this is,
Like something
this
like-
doesn't have very much web to it. This would be, the price here might be 100 a carat versus this might be 15 a carat. So
Okay.
there's a variety.
It's all about
To
the-
say all Lone Mountain is 100 a carat is really not true. The same with Lander. There's some Lander that's not all that good. Most of it, like this is really a good piece, but it has some matrix in here, and that takes a little bit away from it. So instead of this being maybe 300 a carat, it would be 2. So Lone Mountain, Bisbee, Lander, and the other one would be number 8. And it's number 8, it would be the black web number 8, which I don't know if I have any here. The reason, it's actually harder to put your hands on black web number 8 than it is Lander. Most people don't realize, but it's extremely rare. You do find number 8 that looks like this. It's kind of a brown, you see how it's green with a brown matrix? And this is really good turquoise. But the black web is the rarest and most expensive.
Okay.
And it's, I've got some in my collection, I forgot to bring some.
And how about, who are some of the artists that you enjoy either buying from or working from right now? Who do you think's really doing some interesting things, jewelry-wise?
I mean, there's some really great young jewelers coming up there. But I mean, each store, each gallery, we all tend to work, you know, we work with different artists.
I
There's
see.
artists that I respect and think are great, but I don't necessarily get their jewelry. But the ones I really, I think Donnie Suplee is somebody, he doesn't do Indian market, he doesn't do the herd, but he's somebody I think that's really, if you look at where he's come in the last 20 years, he's a great jeweler. And he's in major collections around the country, and we kind of follow that. If collectors are buying their work, that's a good
That
thing
means
for the artist. It means something for that artist. And then I'd say, you know, Wes Willie I've known a long time. He's really, he understands turquoise. Not just because you're native,
Right.
doesn't mean you understand. He really does. Lee Yazzie does, Raymond Yazzie. They have a true love for it. I think they like it. There's young jewelers, like who would you say that you've interviewed?
We like Owens.
Olin,
Owen's
yeah.
been good, and Rick Charlie's been good, and
Yeah.
and Wes was great. It was good talking to him. And I think all those artists that you mentioned, they have they understand the stone, but they also have a really good sense of design. Like they like Wes just puts his pieces together so nicely. And Edison Cummings, I think.
Edison's.
Yeah.
Another thing you notice with jewelers and the beauty of work, people say, Gene, did you make this? And I say, I can't even make my bed. But working with designers, whenever they see an Indian designer and they'll see a piece of turquoise, and if it's really great, then the chance of them making a great piece is much better. And if you just pick a so-so piece, you can see it in somebody's eyes. They're not real excited. So it's fun to put this kind of stone out and show it to the jewelers and say, hey, would send you, yeah, and that's the fun part about it. And it's interesting because you'll have one jeweler that really likes a certain color or style or shape, and the next person you talk to wants, they like a different mine or a different color or different shape. But we're sort of all in this together. We are, and I think the jewelers, they're looking for the turquoise that people want in their work, that they want to collect. I'm talking about more the collector end of it. Not all is collectible. I think a lot of it's just beautiful jewelry to wear.
Just to see it.
Just to see it.
Yeah.
And the common ground is the beauty of the stone, and then the beauty of what the jewelers do with it.
And I guess one last question. We want to do this too, but do you think we can get back to where it was in the 70s, where it becomes such a kind of popular thing? I mean, there seems to be a little bit of that happening now already.
I think there is, and I think what happened in the 70s, it sort of is what happened in the 70s. I mean, I grew up during that time. And what I see now, though, you have young people coming in this that are good, like in advertising or with the books that you're doing, or like things that we do. My son Mike does our brochure that we send out. People like to see something really sharp.
Nicely done.
And nicely done. It's like that's how your books, how your magazine's done. And people love that. The articles are good, but the photography for the jewelry or the artwork is good. And it shows people what first class Native American artwork is like.
Right.
And that's a tribute to what you guys are doing. That's necessary. Because some books are written and they try to cover too much, from just so-so pieces up to the best. Somebody says, well, how do you know it's the best? I said, really, I think customers, collectors determine that. I even tell the jewelers that. I said, they say I'm an artist, and I said, well, how do you know? And they said, what do you mean? I said, I think sometimes it's sort of not the luck of the draw, but the people like you as a person. That's one thing about Laloma. He was so well liked, and he could be a real stinker too.
Right.
But he was well liked and respected, and as an artist. And I think if I were to tell young jewelers today is that it's an art form, but you're dealing with people,
right?
And you find out what they like. And I'm not telling
it's
the
a give
artist.
and take.
It's a give and take.
Yeah.
It's like we work with Richard Chavez. You ask who's I think he's one of the greatest jewelers of our time. I think he's right in there with Laloma, frankly. But Richard doesn't make that much. He works by himself. His son Jared's making jewelry. He's somebody you should interview. Really thoughtful guy. Mainly, though, he works in silver or gold, but he uses other stones. He doesn't use turquoise. He uses agate and different stones like that. But then we've challenged they're good friends, and we'll say, what if we give you turquoise, or what if we give you coral? Would you try to do something with it? And of course, Richard can cut stones. He does inlay, so he does really interesting. But his son Jared, we gave him some beautiful Candelaria turquoise, and he made a bucco bolo out of it that was just exquisite. And he says, I don't usually work turquoise. I said, well, would you try? And he did. It turned out, and it inspired him. He said that it was the turquoise that inspired him.
The stone that does it.
Yeah, the stone. So that's what keeps me going in. I've been doing it for this thing for 44 years, and it's seeing the people who are great, but then the young people that are coming up. And we used to say back in the 70s, I wonder if this thing's going to continue, and it still does.
Right.
I mean, you see it. I mean,
yeah.
You see it with Western art. You see it with American Indian art.
Yeah, it's all still happening. Definitely.
Still happening.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you for your time. We
Well,
really
thanks,
appreciate
Josh.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.